Now, with regard to Eastern religions, Jung was of two minds. One is they were tremendously interesting and appealing and alluring and had a lot to offer and teach us. On the other hand, we had to be careful, Westerners, not to become imitators of cultures other than our own, because that would only foster a very superficial appropriation of what those traditions have to offer. So Jung looked at them with some detachment. He interpreted them. He wrote commentaries on several texts from Eastern religions, as I will show you in a few moments. But I want to start this presentation by indicating that he was neither a rejecter of other traditions nor a subscriber to them. He was a student of them. He was interested in them, and he wanted to try to understand their symbolism and their processes, their spiritual processes, in a psychological way, and perhaps learn from them and appropriate some of their wisdom for his own purposes in psychology. Jung had the opportunity to visit India leaving December of 1938 and staying there for a couple of months. And he traveled with a group of people who had been invited to celebrate one of the universities in India, Calcutta. There were quite a group of notable scientists from the West, mostly from the United Kingdom, from England. And Jung was included as the expert on psychology. There were physicists, chemists, many scientists. It was a scientific congress that was being held. And they disembarked in India in December and traveled around India for a couple of months, and then went to a congress in Calcutta in February of 1938. And then after that Congress, Jung traveled around, went south to Ceylon, and then traveled back home. After about 2.5 months, he became quite ill while he was in India. Amoebic dysentery, spent a week in the hospital. I think he missed the Congress, or part of the Congress. However, he did have a number of very important experiences while he was there. And I think for Jung, it was important to experience the place in order to really put his hands on concretely the atmosphere of the place, to absorb it, to absorb the psyche as it is lived by the people. And so the trip to India was very impressive, although he said in his autobiography, he says he went as though a homunculus in a bottle, and sealed himself off to some extent from what was around him, and yet he did have a number of very important experiences while he was there. But Jung was very interested in China for a couple of reasons. He made contact with China and Chinese materials quite early. They're already referenced in his works like Psychological Types, but the key figure that really turned him on to China was Richard Wilhelm, who he met in the early 1920s in Darmstadt at the School of Wisdom, founded by Count Hermann von Kaiserling. Kaiserling was a German intellectual who traveled widely, went to India, went to China, actually visited Wilhelm in China, came back and wrote a best-selling book on his travels and what he had learned about Eastern wisdom on his journeys. And when he came back, he founded the School of Wisdom in Darmstadt, Germany. And many interesting and important intellectual figures, European figures, and Indian figures. Tagore, for instance, came there and gave some lectures from India. And Jung went on several occasions and met a couple of very important people, became important for his life. And one of them was Richard Wilhelm. And he had an immediate liking for Wilhelm. Wilhelm was a German Protestant missionary to China for 20 years, lived in Qingdao, and like Hauer, who was a missionary to India, said that in his 20 years of missionary work, he never baptized a single Chinese, but he did fall in love with Chinese culture and translated many classic texts, Chinese texts, into German. Among them, one that was very important for Jung, The Secret of the Golden Flower. Another one was the I Ching. And through this friendship with Wilhelm, Jung came in contact with really the foundations of Chinese culture and religion and philosophy in a way he could have never done otherwise. This picture is taken in the Richard Wilhelm house as it looks today. We visited in 2013, and the house has been restored by the Chinese and is being used for educational purposes. And on the third floor, they have a memorial to Richard Wilhelm, who was responsible for the construction of this house and the school next door to it. Another topic that Jung discusses in a couple of essays is Tibetan Buddhism. Here you see a picture of the Dalai Lama receiving Jung's Red Book at a ceremony a few years ago in India. And I don't know if he studied it deeply or what he thinks of it, but he has had connections to Jungians, important connections to Jungians in Zurich. So I imagine he will find it quite interesting, and we'll spend some time looking at the pictures and reading the text. But Jung's writings on Tibetan Buddhism occurred in the 1930s when he was invited to contribute psychological commentaries, one on the Tibetan Book of the Dead and the other one on the Tibetan Book of the Great Liberation. And in these, if you read these, you see Jung being very, very creative with his approach to the text. With the Tibetan Book of the Dead, he turns it upside down, so to speak, reads it backwards, and says, for the Tibetans, the beginning is enlightenment, and it goes downhill from there. With us, it starts at the bottom and it moves toward enlightenment. And so he takes the stages of the prayers for the dead as steps in the individuation process, but in reverse. And so he has interesting things to say about the text and about individuation. Again, looking at a traditional Eastern ancient text from a very contemporary and scientific, psychological point of view, from his point of view. And then in the commentary on the Tibetan Book of the Great Liberation, he wrestles with the mentality that's revealed in this text. He really struggles with it. He interprets some of the terminology, and then he cautions Western people who want to imitate foreign methods. Again, a very familiar statement that he makes so often in his writings.